He was once called the next LeBron. The kid from West Virginia with silky handles, smooth jumper, and the kind of swagger you don't teach. O.J. Mayo wasn't just good, he was a teenage phenomenon. But how does a player go from that level of hype to being banned from the NBA before even hitting 30? To understand the fall, you've got to know how high he once flew. Overton G. Anthony Mayo, or just O.J. Mayo to the world, was born on November 5th, 1987, in Huntington, West Virginia. Raised in a single-parent household, Mayo stood out from a young age, not just for his basketball talent, but for his aura. He wasn't just playing the game, he was controlling it, even as a preteen. By 7th grade, O.J. Mayo was already competing against high school varsity players. That's not a myth, it's documented. He was so advanced in his skills and court IQ that he drew crowds, scouts, and reporters before he even hit his teenage years. It was clear early on, this kid was different. He first gained national attention at Rose Hill Christian in Kentucky, then transferred to North College Hill High School in Ohio, where he teamed up with future NBA big man Bill Walker. The two became a deadly duo, leading their high school to back-to-back state championships at North College Hill. Mayo was more than a player, he was a celebrity. He graced magazine covers, highlight reels, and was widely considered the best high school player in the country. In fact, at one point, he was ranked ahead of Derrick Rose and Kevin Love after dominating Ohio. Mayo returned home to West Virginia for his senior year at Huntington High School. He continued to shine, winning the prestigious Bill Evans Award given to the best high school player in the state and averaging nearly 30 points per game. Every game was a show. Every gym he walked into turned into an event. With his high school days over, Mayo shocked some by choosing to attend the University of Southern California, USC, for college. It wasn't a traditional powerhouse for one-and-done players. But Mayo wanted the bright lights of Los Angeles. At USC, he averaged over 20 points per game in his freshman season, earning first-team All-Pac 1-0 honors and making the all-freshman team. He brought national media attention to the Trojans, selling out arenas and appearing on ESPN highlights almost nightly. But behind the scenes, whispers began. Stories emerged about improper benefits and contact with agents, rumors that would later lead to NCAA violations and vacated wins. It was never proven that Mayo was directly involved, but the cloud followed him. Still, his on-court game spoke loudly. He declared for the NBA draft after just one season, and scouts saw him as a can't-miss talent. In the 2008 NBA draft, O.J. Mayo was selected 3rd overall by the Minnesota Timberwolves. But before he could even suit up in a Timberwolves jersey, he was traded on draft night to the Memphis Grizzlies in exchange for Kevin Love, a move that would shape both franchises in very different ways. From day one in Memphis, Mayo was a bucket in his rookie season. He averaged over 18 points per game, started all 82 games, and looked like a future star. He had the confidence of a 10-year vet, taking and making tough shots. He was named to the NBA All-Rookie First Team and finished 2nd in Rookie of the Year voting behind Derrick Rose. In his sophomore season, he followed it up with another strong campaign, putting up over 17 points a night and continuing to be a focal point of the Grizzlies' offense. But something started to shift, not in his talent, but in his role and reputation. In year 3, Mayo was moved to the bench, a surprising decision that raised eyebrows. Reports surfaced of tension in the locker room, especially with teammate Tony Allen. The two even got into a physical altercation over a card game during a team flight. Mayo's minute dipped, his scoring declined, and questions started to circle. Was O.J. Mayo coachable? Was he a team-first guy? Or was he chasing stardom? By his 4th year in Memphis, he was no longer seen as the face of the franchise. That title was now firmly in the hands of Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol. Mayo's numbers dropped to around 11 points per game, and it became clear the Grizzlies weren't planning to re-sign him. Just 4 years after being drafted, O.J. Mayo went from franchise cornerstone to expendable asset. He signed with the Dallas Mavericks in 2012, hoping for a fresh start. And for a while, it looked promising. In the first half of the season, he averaged over 17 points and was the team's leading scorer while Dirk Nowitzki was out with injury. Analysts said Mayo was finally maturing, finding his rhythm as a professional, but after the All-Star break, his play fell off. Turnovers increased, his aggression faded, and by the end of the season, head coach Rick Carlisle publicly questioned his competitiveness. Mayo declined his player option and walked away from Dallas, once again searching for the right fit. From high school phenom to college star, to NBA All-Rookie, to benched, that's how fast things moved for O.J. Mayo. But even at this point, nobody could have predicted what was coming next. A downfall so steep, so sudden, it would shock the basketball world. And it wasn't just about stats or minutes anymore. What came next would threaten to end O.J. Mayo's basketball career entirely. After his up-and-down stint with the Grizzlies, O.J. Mayo needed a restart. He signed with the Dallas Mavericks in the summer of 2012 on a short-term deal. It was a low-risk move for Dallas and a chance for Mayo to prove that he still had star potential. For the first few months, it seemed like he had found the right fit. With Dirk Nowitzki sidelined due to knee surgery, Mayo became the go-to scorer for the Mavericks. He came out aggressive, averaging over 17 points per game before the All-Star break. His shooting was sharp, his decision-making had improved, and he looked comfortable being the lead guy. He even dropped a season-high 40 points against the Houston Rockets in November. Analysts praised his growth and discipline. It looked like he was finally turning the corner. But once Nowitzki returned, Mayo's role shifted and so did his energy. His scoring dropped, his focus waned, and his turnovers began to rise. Coach Rick Carlisle grew frustrated. In a post-game interview, Carlisle didn't hold back, saying, he's got to show he can be a reliable competitor every night. The criticism was public and the writing was on the wall. O.J. Mayo wasn't the long-term solution for Dallas. By the end of the season, Mayo declined his player option and hit free agency once again. This time, he signed a 3-year, $24 million contract with the Milwaukee Bucks. It was a decent payday, a sign that teams still believed in his talent. But the player who arrived in Milwaukee wasn't the same O.J. Mayo from his Memphis days. He showed up out of shape. Reports described him as overweight and struggling with conditioning during training camp. His debut season with the Bucks, the 2013 to 2014 campaign, was rocky. He missed a chunk of the year due to illness and conditioning issues. He averaged just over 11 points per game, a career low at that point. His minutes dropped, and he came off the bench more than he started. It was clear the Bucks didn't see him as a foundational piece. In year 2 with Milwaukee, Mayo slimmed down and entered the season with renewed focus. He was more of a role player than a scorer, now averaging around 11 points and playing solid minutes off the bench. He embraced the new identity, a veteran mentor on a rebuilding team. He became a favorite among the younger guys for his unselfish play and steady presence. It wasn't the stardom he was once promised, but it was a place in the league for O.J. Mayo. That meant something. But the consistency didn't last. In his third and final season with Milwaukee, 2015 to 2016, Mayo's production cratered. He averaged under 8 points per game and was limited to just 41 appearances due to multiple injuries, including a sprained ankle and a fractured toe. His body was starting to betray him, and his future in the league looked dim. Then, on July 1st, 2016, the bombshell dropped. The NBA announced that O.J. Mayo had been dismissed and disqualified from the league for violating the NBA NBPA anti-drug program. He was not just suspended, he was banned. The punishment was rare and severe, typically reserved for only the most serious drug violations. The specific substance wasn't publicly disclosed, but based on the league's classification, it was not marijuana or performance-enhancing drugs. It fell into the category of drugs of abuse, a list that includes cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and similar substances. This wasn't a one-time slip-up. For the league to issue a dismissal and disqualification, it meant Mayo had either tested positive for a banned substance more than once or had refused to comply with treatment protocols. Either way, the NBA made its stance clear. O.J. Mayo was out. And not just for a season. The ruling meant Mayo would be banned for at least 2 full years, after which he could apply for reinstatement, but there were no guarantees. Very few players had ever returned from that kind of ban. In the eyes of the basketball world, O.J. Mayo's career was over. The news hit like a sledgehammer. Fans were shocked. Media outlets called it one of the most tragic collapses of a young NBA talent in recent memory. A player who had once been compared to Kobe Bryant was now lumped in with cautionary tales. He had it all and lost it all. One ESPN analyst said, and not because of injury, but because of choices. Mayo disappeared from the spotlight. No interviews, no statements, no social media clarifications. For a long time, he just went quiet. But behind the scenes, Mayo was spiraling. In a rare interview years later, he admitted that the suspension was rock bottom. "I messed up," he said. "I was around the wrong people. I wasn't focused. I thought I was invincible." He talked about how the lack of structure after being banned made things worse. Without the game, it had no anchor, no schedule, no purpose. "I felt like a shadow of myself," he admitted. "Waking up every day without basketball was the hardest thing. I had to relearn how to live." That summer, O.J. Mayo wasn't in a gym. He wasn't working on his shot. He was trying to figure out if he even wanted to play basketball again. He'd been banned from the league. He grew up dreaming about the league he fought to be a part of, and he'd let it all slip away. And yet, somewhere in the middle of the silence, something inside him shifted. He started working out again, alone. At first, quietly, he hired trainers, got back in shape, and slowly reconnected with the game that had once defined his entire identity. It wasn't about making an NBA comeback anymore. It was about finding himself again, about restoring pride. People who saw him during those months said he was different. Not in a flashy, "I'm back" kind of way, but grounded, humble, focused. This wasn't the confident teenager calling his own plays in high school, or the rising star dropping 20 a night in Memphis. This was a man trying to pick up the pieces, and although he was no longer wearing an NBA jersey, Mayo was preparing for something far more important, a second chance at life, and maybe eventually at basketball. After the NBA slammed its doors shut, O.J. Mayo vanished from the American basketball spotlight. One day, he was on an NBA roster. The next, he was gone. No farewell tour, no press conference, just silence. But while the world moved on, Mayo wasn't done. In the quiet that followed his ban, Mayo began to rebuild himself physically, mentally, emotionally. He stopped chasing the NBA and started chasing something deeper. Discipline, self-respect, and a new identity. The fall had been public, but the redemption would be private. At least at first. The comeback didn't start under the bright lights of Madison Square Garden or the Staples Center. It started in a tiny gym in Puerto Rico. In the summer of 2018, Mayo signed with Atléticos de San Germán, a team in Puerto Rico's Baloncesto Superior National League. It wasn't glamorous. The gyms were small. The crowds were local. But it was a beginning. Mayo put up solid numbers around 13 points per game, but more importantly, he started playing with purpose again. There was no spotlight, no ego, just basketball. Still, the transition wasn't seamless. His contract was short-lived, and his production inconsistent. He was cut after 21 games, but instead of quitting, Mayo took the setback as motivation. He wasn't going back to the old ways. Later that year, Mayo packed his bags and headed for Taiwan. He signed with the destined Tigers in the Super Basketball League in Taiwan. Something clicked. Free from the noise, the pressure, and the expectations of the NBA, Mayo thrived. He led the league in scoring, averaging nearly 23 points per game. He grabbed rebounds. He made plays. He even won the league's three-point contest. But more than the stats, it was the way he carried himself. Teammates described him as focused, humble, always early to practice. He was no longer the rising prodigy or the troubled star. He was a grinder, a professional, a guy who knew what it was like to lose everything and wasn't about to let it happen again. By 2019, word had spread. Mayo could still hoop. He was still strong, still smart, still capable of dominating games. And he took the next leap this time, to China. He joined the Liaoning Flying Leopards in the Chinese Basketball Association. The CBA had become a haven for former NBA players looking for redemption, and Mayo fit right in. In his debut, he scored over 20 points. In another game, he dropped 48. He was a walking bucket again. More than that, he was a leader. In China, Mayo was respected, not because of who he used to be, but because of who he had become. He put up big numbers, sure, but he also took younger players under his wing, stayed late after games, and spoke about gratitude and second chances. He was living proof that you could fall, get back up, and do it the right way. The Chinese fans embraced him. He was no longer just the guy who got banned. He was a fighter, survivor. He became a fan favorite, a key piece for Liaoning, and someone the media praised not just for his performance, but for his growth. Then came another challenge, Russia. In 2021, Mayo signed with Unix Kazan in the VTB United League. This was a step up in terms of competition and structure. It was serious ball. He accepted a role off the bench and embraced the grind again. In one of the season's most memorable games, Mayo hit a buzzer-beating three in triple overtime to lift Kazan over CSKA Moscow, one of Europe's powerhouse clubs. It wasn't just a win, it was a message. Mayo was still here. After his time in Russia, Mayo made another surprising move. He joined Zamalek, the reigning champions of Egypt's Basketball Africa League. It was a league on the rise, backed by the NBA and FIBA, aiming to grow the game across Africa. Mayo brought experience, name recognition, and work ethic. He wasn't chasing headlines, he was helping build something, and it didn't stop there. By 2024, he was back in China, not as a player this time, but as a coach. He joined Liaoning's staff as an assistant, focusing on player development and mentorship. It was a full circle moment. The same franchise that gave him a chance was now giving him the opportunity to lead. OJ Mayo, once banned, was now helping others grow. Throughout this international journey, Mayo stayed mostly out of the American media. No dramatic interviews, no emotional tell-alls, just a few quotes sprinkled over the years. In one, he said, "I had it all, and I blew it. But I learned I'm better now, and I'm thankful." In another, he admitted that the lifestyle that came with early fame had taken its toll. "I didn't respect the game enough," he said. "Now, I do." He spoke about meditation, about diet, about how he had cut ties with toxic people, about how getting banned was, in some ways, the best thing that ever happened to him because it forced him to find out who he really was. Mayo's international chapter isn't just about basketball. It's about redemption. It's about a man learning how to live again, how to lead, how to serve. It's about embracing roles that don't come with headlines. It's about playing in front of 5,000 fans instead of 20,000 and still giving it everything. It's about doing the work not for a contract, not for a comeback, but for peace. In a world where so many stories end with the fall, O.J. Mayo chose to keep writing. And though his NBA story might be over, his legacy, the real one, is being built every day. One quiet act of leadership at a time, far away from the cameras. By the summer of 2018, O.J. Mayo became eligible to apply for reinstatement to the NBA. 2 full years had passed since his dismissal, and by league rules, he could submit a formal request to be reinstated, but eligibility didn't mean opportunity. The NBA wasn't exactly knocking on his door. Mayo did file the necessary paperwork quietly. No big press release, no public plea, just a formal request to return to the league that had once shut him out, and then silence. The truth is, NBA teams weren't lining up to give him a second shot. He was no longer the teenage phenom or the 20-point scorer from Memphis. He was a 30-year-old guard with baggage, aging legs, and a name still tied to scandal. For most general managers, the math didn't add up. But for Mayo, this chapter wasn't really about the NBA anymore. Sure, returning to the league would have been nice. It would have completed the arc, tied the story with a bow, but redemption doesn't always end with a comeback headline. Sometimes it ends with healing. And that's what Mayo found slowly, country by country, league by league. The truth is, Mayo no longer needed the NBA to define him. His time abroad in Puerto Rico, Taiwan, China, Russia, and Egypt had become more than a detour. It had become a new direction, a place where he rediscovered why he loved the game in the first place. He'd stopped chasing the noise and started listening to himself. In doing so, he found clarity. He told an Egyptian sports outlet, "Basketball used to be my identity. Now, it's my purpose. I used to play for me. Now, I play for what the game teaches." In Zamalek, he wasn't the superstar. He wasn't the marketing headline. He was the steadying voice in the huddle. The guy who stayed late after practice to help younger players with footwork or defensive reads. The guy who encouraged rather than criticized. The guy who understood what it meant to fall and what it took to rise again. That humility followed him to his coaching role in Liaoning. No longer the one taking shots, Mayo became the one guiding others. He broke down film. He ran drills. He shared stories not about the fame, but about the fall and how to avoid it. Players listened because it wasn't coming from a coach who had always done things right. It was coming from a man who had once done everything wrong and survived it. There's something powerful about that when someone who's been to the bottom tells you there's still light ahead. It carries weight. That's the value Mayo brings now. Not just his jump shot, but his scars. The NBA never officially said no to his return, but it never said yes either. And at some point, Mayo stopped waiting for the call. He moved forward, not bitter, just better. There's a kind of peace in that not every redemption story ends with a buzzer beater or a championship ring. Sometimes the win is quieter, more personal. It's waking up with purpose. It's being proud of who you are when no one's watching. It's rebuilding your name, not for applause, but for yourself. And in that sense, O.J. Mayo has already won. He may never wear an NBA jersey again. But the man who once lost everything is now helping others find their way. He's proof that even after the league turns its back, even after the headlines fade, you can still stand up, still grow, still matter. The comeback doesn't always look like a SportsCenter highlight. Sometimes it looks like showing up every day and doing the work no one sees. And that's exactly what O.J. Mayo is doing. He may never lace up in the NBA again, He may never hear the roar of 20,000 fans chanting his name, but OJ Mayo's real comeback isn't about contracts or stats, it's about character. It's about facing the mirror, owning the past, and building a future rooted in something deeper than fame, in gyms far from home, in roles no longer drenched in spotlight. He found purpose. And maybe that's the lesson. Redemption isn't about going back, it's about going forward wiser, stronger, and finally free